Good afternoon, everyone. This is the weekly finance meeting for the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners. Today, Wednesday, September 23rd. We call this meeting to order, and we don't need a roll call for this one, but we do have minutes from the previous meeting, and I'll entertain a motion in that regard.
I'll move to approve those minutes.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to our topic of discussion for the day. As most of you know, the finance meeting is generally reserved for a sort of deep dive, in-depth look at issues of interest to the operations of the county. And our topic today is we're going to have an informational session and Q&A in regards to the issue of home rule for Pennsylvania counties. And we're joined by two representatives of the Pennsylvania Economy League. I'll let, welcome, thank you for being with us today. I'll let each of you introduce yourselves and then you're free to proceed with the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us participate with your committee today to review the home rule of Pennsylvania counties. My name is Leanne Clayberger. I'm the CEO of the Pennsylvania Economy League. I brought our subject matter expert, Jerry Cross. He's a senior research fellow with the Pennsylvania Economy League. The Economy League is a nonprofit 501c3 that does technical assistance and independent research throughout the state. We've been in existence for for more than 80 years, actually. So we have worked with a lot of different municipalities and counties, and worked on a lot of different local government issues, including home rule and the process of looking at home rule. I'm going to turn it over to Jerry, and I'll turn off my video and load the presentation here in a second, but I'll turn it over to Jerry to introduce himself and to proceed.
Thank you, Leanne. I was in that room, I think that same room, doing this very similar presentation back in 2014 in the county, I remember.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and by way of introduction, I have worked on several government study commissions. The Autonomy League has served as staff for several government study commissions, most recently Luzerne County and Clinton County. In the past, however, we've assisted Lancaster County, the home rule effort in Lancaster County several years ago. Also the Schoolville County one and a few others across the state that I can't remember, but it's often enough that we've developed a good knowledge base on it. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think we'll start the presentation. Leanne will control the slides.
And hopefully you're seeing my screen right now.
I am. Let me close my. Okay, thank you. The second slide, Leanne, please.
All right, we don't have slides, but we do have the handout, so I guess we'll just
Oh, okay.
proceed with
All right,
that.
good. So I can see what you're seeing then. Okay, second page. Really, what is home rule? We'll go over the concepts. There's three main reasons today. What is home rule? Give you an overview of exactly what home rule means for a county. Why home rule? Why would the county take the steps? Why do the citizens take the steps necessary? And if you do go down that route, what is the process that you will follow? So on the third page, the home rule basics. There's a lot of words on this page, but really, it's important to understand that the Constitution of Pennsylvania allows for a home rule government of municipalities, and it's important to understand that it's a self-directed process. It isn't a legislatively directed process for as you are under the county code. It's more self-directed, and of course it requires local voter approval. You're no longer looking at the legislature, you are looking at your local voters to approve the different elements of home rule. The concept of home rule on sport, the concept is that it's a basic authority is transferred from the legislature under their municipal codes to the local charter or local plan of government that was done homegrown, locally drafted, locally studied, and locally approved by the voters. And it's important that under the state code, You are only allowed to do what it is permitted by law. That's Dillon's rule. Dillon's rule essentially says you can't do what you're not allowed to do by authorization. But under home rule, you essentially turn it on its head, and you are permitted to do things which are not otherwise prohibited. So that opens up a lot of concepts and a lot of opportunities for different government structures, different suggestions on essentially what your local environment, your local populace, what your services require, how are they best satisfied by a different form of government to make it more efficient and effective under home rule. The whole concept of home rule tries to tie back to local understanding of the citizens' requirements, the local asset base to provide services, and what's the most efficient and effective way, understanding county code that is statewide may not work locally. The next page on 5, principles of home rule really are they're all pretty related. The biggest thing for home rule, other than reversing Dillon's rule, is you're doing your own form of government. And the concept is you understand your government's limitations and benefits best so that you can do the flexibility that requires a structure that answers your needs most effectively. You have a responsibility to research that, we'll get into that later, but it's an opportunity that gives you the government that you need and that you can best use. There are home limitations on 6. It's not a free ride, it's not 100% unfettered. Obviously, the United States Constitution, Pennsylvania Constitution, which is where you get your local government laws from, the local government organization. There are also limitations under home rule law. That's Act 62. That's the actual home rule optional plans law. That will govern how you change your charter. So you have certain changes that are required. If you have laws that are uniform and applicable throughout the Commonwealth, those laws will still govern in the county. And that's a very important distinction. There are some laws that we think in local government circles, because of our experience, those laws must be applicable everywhere. But you'd be surprised the number of laws that are not uniform or applicable through every part of the Commonwealth. Those laws will not apply to home rule, and many home rule jurisdictions have taken advantage of that. But generally speaking, those that are uniform and applicable throughout the Commonwealth must be followed regardless of the charter status. And then, of course, there are laws that are directly expressly aimed at home rule governments. I don't know off the top of my head which ones they are, but there are some that had to be passed simply to fill gaps in the home rule process since 1972. And lastly, your charter. Your charter is going to put on the biggest limitation on what the government can do or not do. Generally speaking, most charters are fairly wide open and discretionary, but there are limits to what a charter can, there are limits that a charter could put on how the government moves forward. The charter itself, in the shorthand way, is the constitution for your county that kind of elevates it to a higher plane, but it really is. It is your framework of government, how you want to run your form of government for your citizens. On page 7, we have what is home rule on restrictions in state law. These are fairly significant. These go back to the uniform and applicable part that I mentioned. Probably the biggest one you might consider in your budget process is arbitration labor relations. That's Act 111. So those covered employees under Act 111 and arbitration law will still be covered. You can't change that. You cannot redraw municipal boundaries by county fiat. That still remains a local option. You cannot, the county itself, the charter cannot rearrange the boundaries of municipalities or school districts. The independence of municipalities is maintained. You cannot dictate to municipalities from the county level beyond what you're allowed to do. So you simply can't pick out a municipality and say that you will do what we need you to do outside of regular legal authorization. And there's a bunch there. The election code, obviously, these are statewide laws. Recall, interestingly enough, there is no recall in Pennsylvania, so you can't put that into your charter. Many charters have that in it. Sometimes I think it's just a feel-good thing, you can't do recall. You can't redistrict your legislative lines. You still have to have the sunshine, open meetings, and open records act. The other things that are specific restrictions on home rule that you can't really change, you're still subject to local agency law. Your actions are still reviewable and appealable to a higher level. You can't exclude yourself from court claims. You still have restriction on how much to borrow and the limits of your tax base and the requirements to follow on borrowing. Subjects to taxation, that's Act 511 and the other tax laws that set who you can tax. You cannot create new subjects to taxation. You are still subject to uniformity law, so you can't simply create new subjects of taxation that don't vote as often as the other ones. Court-appointed personnel. Most counties chafe between the independence, between the budget requirements of the court, their ability to change those, and the county's inability to change court budgets and personnel without great difficulty. The court remains an independent branch. The other items, veterans preference, clean streams, those kind of things are uniform and they cover it, and you really can't charter your way out of it. And it goes without saying, federal laws that apply to Pennsylvania as a whole, you still are subject to. The next slide, probably again, and we just get a little bit to the last slide, all these except restrictions, but they're significant enough. The local government autonomy, the second from the bottom, that's probably the most sensitive one when you're doing a charter. Many local governments will be concerned that somehow you will usurp the powers or the responsibilities, and you simply can't do that. And of course, zoning, you're still subject to the municipality's planning code for zoning. So, having said that, why home rule, I guess, is the next question. Seeing exactly how many things are limited away from your choice in the charter. So why go down the road of home rule? We put together a lot of common reasons from our experience and from published documents and charters. These are a lot of reasons government study commissions put down why they wanted to have government charters, and also the thinking behind the cures that they were trying to address. There's the administrative code, which allows you to have a living and breathing administrative code separate from your charter. So the charter gives you the basic framework of your government. Your administrative code gives you a lot of the ability to manage day to day. Some charters have initiative and referendum in them for increased citizens' access. That's used on occasion. I've seen it used on occasion, but you see initiative and referendum more in the writing than you do in the action of it. Improved accountability and responsiveness from on a county level. Flexibility in taxes. That may be the biggest reason on a municipal level, sub-county, the municipal boroughs, cities, and townships. They look at home rule often for the flexibility in taxation, because Act 511 limits on taxation are more inflexible on a municipal basis. As a county, you do enjoy the economic development growth county-wide. Local municipalities may have stagnant property growth, and they look at flexibility in the taxation structure. There's wider representation, professional administration, and separate legislative and executive functions. Many charters seem to try to compare their local government to the federal model with separate branches of legislation, executive, and judicial. More practically speaking, you're probably looking at more of a state level function where you have an executive and just the council legislative functions for ordinances and laws. The next page on 12, simply county-wide, what's more in focus with the county charters was better checks and balances, and we'll jump down to the third bullet. That often turns into a discussion of the commissioners and row officers, the requirement by the county code to have separate row officers and separate commissioner board. with requirement to fund through office of separately elected officials. That leads to the separate executive appointed and elected dichotomy. A lot of times you have the pressures in county government between those appointed, those elected, the responsibilities of the federal and state pass-through funding, all your different responsibilities, and yet you have separate elected officials that are officials within and of themselves. So that leads, of course, to clear lines of authority and command duplication overlap. So a lot of the county home rule charters look to streamline the whole operation of their government by looking at the different offices and different responsibilities inherent in each office. So what's the home rule process? What are you going through? This will be on 14, I guess we could jump through the home rule process. If you want to do a home rule process, it is a journey. I would think it takes about 2 years. In my experience, 2 to 2.5 years. It is initiated by the governing body or by the citizens. The petition requirements, the citizens can have a petition and they can do a 5% of the governor's vote. I don't know what the total Cumberland County vote for governor was, but I did have Lancaster's in 2018, and Lancaster's was about 200,000 people. I realize you don't have that many people voting in the gubernatorial, but to give you a sense, 5% of the governor's vote in 2018 is a pretty high threshold. And that would be the petition signatures necessary. And there's a limited time that you can do that. So the petitions can't be circulated less than 20 weeks, more than 20 weeks before the election, and I think there's a deadline of 13 weeks before. So essentially, 7 or 8 weeks is the time you have to collect those petitions. So if you had 100,000 people voting for governor, you would need 5,000 signatures, ballot signatures within those weeks. However, a lot of times if there's a serious petition movement and there's an agreement on the governing body, i.e. the county commissioners, you can pass the referendum question by vote of the county commissioners. That's been done quite a bit. Many times the county commissioners see a petition movement, they try to get ahead of it and pass a referendum, pass the ordinance to provide the question on the ballot and to create the question. There are 3 possible questions that you can ask in the election. One is just plain optional plan, and that's kind of a limited form of government off the shelf, off the rack, so to speak. That doesn't address a lot of the issues inherent in the charter drafting, but the optional plan is simply, do you want an optional plan or don't you? You don't see that very often nowadays. I think the most recent one was Williamsport. I saw Williamsport put that on the ballot a couple years ago. Home rule itself, just asking the possible question, do you favor the creation of a government study commission to look at home rule only? You know, that's it. You can only look at the advantages of home rule. Or the hybrid question, which a lot of people accept, which is home rule or optional plan. So you have a lot of options. That way the government study commission can return and they have the broadest latitude of what to study. The question that you'll put on the ballot, either by petition or ordinance, will specify how many people are in the government study commission. You can have 7, 9, or 11. Municipalities typically go for 7. Counties, I think, typically, in my experience, go 9 or 11, because you have a broader pool of people and you have a bigger geographic area. Municipalities sometimes struggle to find 7 people willing to run for a government study commission. Counties, however, I think usually have a surplus of people running. Once this board is empaneled, and it's important to understand, you have to have the question receive a majority yes vote on the question, does the voter favor creating a government study commission, yes or no? At the same election, they will vote for the number of people specified. So if the first question says, do you favor a government study commission formation, you check yes, then you also would vote for 9 or 11 or 7 people. If you vote no, you still vote for 7, 9, or 11 people because the majority outcome of the question determines whether or not you're in panel. So it gets a little confusing, but at the same election, you're representing, you're asking the question and you're appointing people to the commission. When that commission does its work, there's a limit on how long they have. They have 9 months to decide what to do, whether to fold up or make recommendations or go to a charter or an optional plan. They then get another 9 months to form that charter or that option, well, not so much optional plan, to write the charter. And if their charter decides that there should be voting districts as opposed to at-large election of officials, then you get an extra 2 months to draw the maps. Then when all this is done, and as you can see, 9, 18 months into this process, plus the 13 weeks or so ahead of time for the election, voters then get to decide. The commission, the Government Study Commission, picks the election that they will have the question on the ballot, but ultimately the voters of the county decide whether or not to accept or reject the whole follow-ups. If they do accept it, then there's a transition period. And that transition period is usually specified in the charter, and the commission committee composed of elected officials and such. But that's the overview of the process itself. It's a long haul, but it's been effective in many places. On 15, we have the process expanded a little bit more. The commission members must be just a registered voter. Everyone is eligible. It's a nonpartisan election, no party label. You need 2% of the signatures to be on the ballot. Obviously, you're going to need more than 200 is the minimum. If you can't, it's a very small municipality. But 2% of the countywide people that voted for governor in 2018 would be what was necessary. Those signatures, very tight time frame to get those signatures. And this is why in small towns there's sometimes a problem getting admissions. You can't circulate a petition earlier than 13 weeks from the election, and I believe you have to have it done by 10 weeks. So there's a very narrow, less than a month time to get those signatures on the ballot, and that'll make you a candidate. So a lot of times in countywide elections, you see tickets formed where people join together and collect petitions to get signatures together. On the next page, after the Government Study Commission work is done, there's a public vote referendum. Anytime after the report itself is filed, the commission will decide what election to go in. They don't have to be in the next election. They can go to a primary, then go to a general. They will decide as part of the charter process. And then implementation occurs usually the following January, but it could be set up that it occurs concurrent or in between the municipal primaries. It's important to understand if you're a city commissioner and there's a home rule charter, you do not lose your seat. You hold your term for the term you're elected for, and then your re-election or election to another office is subject to the charter. So sometimes you have transitional forms of government where you expand the board temporarily and that kind of thing. On 17, we talk about the role of the study commission member. Oftentimes, people that are disgruntled or not happy with the direction of whatever, or have local issues that are more regional in nature and not maybe totally countywide, they sometimes see the role of a study commission member as more of an activist, more of a way to parlay an election by election to the commission into a seat of power, and that's not what it is. A government study commission is that, it's study. You're required to study the form of government to determine if that government can be improved to a more efficient and effective way. It is not a way to settle scores. It is not a way to cast aspersions or shade on anyone. It's a study mechanism. And what follows is you're not inquisitors. You don't have subpoena power. You're not supposed to, it's not designed to rehash controversial questions or decisions. It is truly a high-level view of the function of the government, regardless of who's in office or the recent actions. Of course, having said that, a lot of times government study commissions are formed because people are angry. I live in Luzerne County where, in my lifetime, there's been 4 government study commission votes. And it wasn't until members of our judiciary and members of our row offices and local officials went to jail that the Government Study Commission actually approved, and the charter was accepted. It took some rather dramatic changes. The study itself, as an elected official, you need to know that the study requires the Government Study Commission, they need to talk to people. They have to interview current officials. The interview process is, tell us about your job, tell us about how you know, the strengths and weaknesses, your frustration, your advantages in your position, what would you like to change, how do you see it being made more effective and efficient. They should look at other counties. There's 7 home rule forms of government in counties, I believe, in Pennsylvania, so there's enough to look at there. Relatively, Pennsylvania, you can travel and interview these people. You need to study the other forms of county government that are in the optional plan laws, the other types of governments that are available in the optional plan. And of course, you need to visit. So the study commission will need a budget to visit, if you go this far, to at least look at the other counties in person, 1 or 2 or 3 of the other counties that are more similar to Cumberland. And after all that is done, you have to do a conclusion and a recommendation, which is actually a report. You have to file a report. The report contains the findings of the Government Study Commission, and as part of that report, there's a recommended charter or a form of government optional plan. After that all work is done, and that needs to be done in 9 months for the first phase, and then the second 9 months to draft the charter. On page 18, the process is what you can decide there's no change. Lawrence County did exactly that a few years ago. They simply met and said, you know, we're happy with the form, so we're not going to change anything. Other counties or municipalities have said, we don't think we need a change, but we have a lot of recommendations based on our study. And the existing government is free to accept those or reject those as they need to. And the next one is optional plan. We can get into that. That may be a kind of an example of what some of the charters use. They pick those as existing, rather than creating something from whole cloth. They do pick those as frameworks, and they integrate those into a home rule charter. On page 19, it's a lot of this is just for you can see this later for your own review, but the charter itself these are the main parts of the charter. It will say its purpose, what powers are vested in the county governing body, whatever form that is, whether it's a commissioner or a council or elected executive. It will have limited scope of powers, so the county voters know exactly what the powers they're granting to the government, and other things, including general provisions of ethics and accountability and things that must be in the charters and not necessarily administrative code. The important thing to understand about the charter is if it's in the charter, it's very difficult to change. If the charter should be more broadly written and less specifically written, specifics are for the administrative code so that code can be changed by action of the governing body. You cannot change your charter outside of the Government Study Commission process and another vote. If you have, there's gradations of what you can change in the charter going forward. If they don't involve a change in the government or in the change of the basic charter, there are some changes that you can make and send to the voters for approval. But overall, you have once it's in the charter, it is there. It's hard to get it out the charter. On 20, again, I'm rehashing what I had in the earlier slides, but there's an important one here. The second from the bottom is the area-wide powers. This is important for a county to understand. This is one of the powers granted by home rule charter. It's not applicable so much to municipalities, but in a county setting, the county would be able to have area-wide powers, by which I mean you could sponsor regional service districts. You could sponsor districts that are sub-county level, but regional and wide enough that it reflects the rural nature of the county versus the urban nature of the county, the stormwater requirements of the county versus the non-governed parts of the county, the police protection. If you see that there's a need for a regional police force that's having trouble staying in or whatever, you all know the different situations. You can sponsor area-wide functions. And you can assign you can collect a tax that's only available in that part of the municipality, or those municipalities, that part of the county. Ordinarily, you can't do that. Ordinarily, your uniformity clause requires when you pass a mill of taxes, other than special purpose taxes, when you pass that mill, it's levied across the county. So it makes it hard for you to do sponsorship of areas and take advantage of the tax base in county or in sub-county areas without this provision. That doesn't come with the municipalities in the area can still opt out. You can't force them in, but you can offer your sponsorship and your ability to collect taxes and distribute those taxes back to that area. And that's really, for a county, that's one of the more important things that Home Rule Charter gives you for tax flexibility, because really your tax base is limited by and large property tax. The last 4 pages are just the executive council plan. This is one of the more common ones you see in counties, where the council members are elected and the executive is elected. You see that in Delaware, Lehigh, Northampton, Allegheny, in Lackawanna. You don't see that. They kept the commissioner form of government. They had the commissioners, 3 commissioners, and the row officers. They made some tweaks to that. The executive, whether they're elected in this case, would then have the departments operating underneath them. That's one plan that you see in county charters. The next one is a council manager plan. This is similar. This is where Luzerne, I think, ended up. I think who else has this? I don't think Erie has this, but this is the electorate appoints the council. The council becomes the governing body. They appoint the manager. The manager's appointment is then governed by the charter and how many votes it takes to remove the manager, et cetera, et cetera. But the manager is in charge of the day-to-day running of the county, and they answer to the council. In that form of government, you may or may not have row officers. And oftentimes you see row offices combined, consolidated along function lines, whether it's record keeping or judicial record keeping or taxation. You don't see the elimination of the row offices functions. Oftentimes you see a merger on the county level of the row officers, and sometimes they maintain elected row officers for independents, typically the DA, well, not the DA, sometimes the sheriff, and more often than not the controller. You see that a lot. So those are the kind of things that may come out of the Home Rule Charter form of government to manage the responsibilities. But after that, we can talk.
Questions, anybody?
Jerry, you said from beginning to end, this would be 2.5 years.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. My most recent experience was, Clinton was close to 2 years. Luzerne, from start to finish, because that was a successful vote, the voters adopted the charter. That started in 2008, and the charter was effective in 2011. So there's 2008, 2009, drafting ended in the election was in 2010, and the form of government started in 2011. So you can see that about 2.5 years ago. That's from start to finish.
Jerry, a couple of questions. In any of the cases you're familiar with, I mean, the way this sounds is it's pretty much the Wild West, as it were, that we basically open the door for a charter to be written, but it's not really known what that charter might look like until those people are impaneled and sit down and go through their process. Is that a misinterpretation on my part, or do people tend to run with a specific agenda and win based on specific ideas? How much of it is, I guess what I'm asking is, how much of it is sort of known up front versus a work in progress?
Well, what's known up front is what's not possible, which are those laws you can't change. So that's what the first several slides, the tedious detail, just to let you know, people can't come in and change zoning. They can't come in and get rid of the financing of the county courts. Things like that. They can't go against the contracts that are granted and somehow do that. But the characterization of Wild West is interesting, because I've been in situations where, that's the words I've used to the Government Study Commission, saying, guys, this is not, or gals, this is not the Wild West. You have to focus here. A lot of times it's the politics behind the movement. If there is a issue that lends itself to the solution of a charter, if there's an active political issue that lends itself to the process of the charter, you'll have enough, in my experience, enough people running with a sincere interest in changing the government to answer that problem, as opposed to the people that are just disgruntled at the fact that they have to pay property taxes, and that there's too many people in the courthouse, and there's different. Those citizens are well-intentioned, but oftentimes they're myopic in their vision of what government needs to function and the responsibilities of government. So I tell people it comes down to the election of commissioners, comes down to the internal politics of the political structure of the municipality. Everyone knows people they trust. Everyone knows people that they might not, let them babysit their kids. And it's important for the community to back those candidates that are trustworthy. But it's also important for the community to get people on the ballot that are trustworthy, and not have this process sort of hijacked or run by people whose intentions are not compatible with the results of the charter. Because what will happen is the charter will be rejected. It'll be seen as a single-purpose document, not a long-term constitution, and that's probably the greatest danger.
Okay, let me follow up. So now you use the example of Missouri, where it took essentially 4 tries, and there was a huge catalyzing event that actually was what finally pushed it forward. How often does something like this occur without that huge catalyzing event?
In my experience, it takes a catalyzing event. In Clinton, it was and I'll speak to the ones that I'm used to. In Clinton, it was the bookkeeping errors of the controller, but also the cost of a state college murder trial that ended up in Clinton County, and the DA's expense was over $1 million, and people just wanted to change the form of government that had a part-time DA and a few other basic things like that. Lehigh Northampton was more, and they go back to the 70s. You have to draw a line. There's a distinction between those charters that were created in the 70s and the 80s. They were more products of the good government movement, that there's local people felt that there was a better way to manage their governments locally, and those governments you'll see like Delaware, Lehigh, Northampton, Erie, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head how Lackawanna. Those were the functions of, let's look at our government, let's examine it, and let's change it, and see if the voters approve. But in the last 20 years, in my experience, there's been more catalyzing events. I'm trying to think where the Luzerne was definitely, Lackawanna had a government study commission a few years ago that was functioning, that was promised by, there was a scandal in the prison, it happens a lot of times, as you mentioned, a catalyzing event that focuses people's attention on the county. Okay, good publicity, bad publicity, people say, there's got to be a way to change. And people sometimes mistakenly look at government study commissions as positions, extrajudicial ways for people to get behind the scenes and get under the hood and really look at things, but with a vindictive bet as opposed to a improvement bet against us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I apologize for going on with these are unique animals, and each one has its own genesis. Okay, partners may be different, and the product may be different, but each one are unique, but they all go down the home rule path, because that's the law of the government.
You mentioned about the independence of municipalities, and I think we all fully understand that the county's not gonna be, essentially establishing a superior position for itself. But have you ever seen instances in which home rule or an effort toward home rule could influence things such as municipal mergers or authority consolidation, or even just more cooperation? Are there any factors in home rule that promote those things?
I think the charter could do that. I think they could do that. Under the Areawide Division, it does give the county sort of a sponsorship role. Counties have a large sponsorship role now in convening and bringing together municipal officials. But the area-wide powers allow you to use the taxation for the benefit of a specific area. I think that's a very powerful tool. It's only available, I believe, the home rule charter municipality. It allows you to levy taxes or fees for the direct benefit of those people that are getting the service.
So now,
Right now,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
so that's the way to think of that.
I don't recall hearing that when we had the presentation before, but that is a long time ago. That really catches my attention for a number of reasons. But, so is that area-wide, is that similar to what, say, a municipality does with a business improvement district?
Yeah, with the caveat that the two different animals, but yes, it is where business improvement district is typically a millage or a percentage levy
Right.
to be spent within that narrow area. So imagine you have 4 municipalities that want to form a police department, and rather than having, I guess the best way to describe it is you combine the assessment base of that municipality, you levy the real estate tax only in those municipalities. The county collects the money. The county then sends the money, either sponsors the formation of the county, of the regional police department, or sponsors it through financing it by taking the money and committing, you be the collector of revenue and you apply it to the area where it's being used. Right now, if you collect the mill of taxes countywide, it goes into your general county operations. This is a way for you to help local municipalities merge their tax base. It isn't widely used. I think that maybe the clearest analogy is the landfill, the county sponsorship
Yes.
solid waste program.
Mhm.
Okay? That may be the clearest example you have. And that wasn't home rule, that was a special legislation. But that type of county sponsorship.
Yeah. It sounds like it would have a lot of possibilities.
It does. And think about road repair. I don't know how many miles of road Cumberland has. Bridges, obviously.
Bridges, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you charge for a bridge.
Okay.
Those kind of area-wide improvements that we need. Up in Luzerne County, there is a levy. They can't figure out how to make the levy pay everyone in the county pay for the levy, even though the levy protects everyone to some respect. And they're stuck with using a fee. They looked at area-wide taxation to spread the cost of the levy over the assessed base of those people protected by the levy. So that's the closest I've seen someone try to use that for specifics.
It does not change the assessment. It does not change the assessment of the area. It's simply the millage rate that changes. Is that right?
Basically, everyone else in the county pays the county rate. You would then levy a rate to be used in that area.
So it's the rate.
Yeah,
Okay.
additional, special purpose.
Special purpose. Okay. Thank you.
I think it has a lot of opportunity. The problem with it is to get it, you have to go through the charter process. And
I was just going to say, it would seem to be very much in tune with what you were saying about a good government movement, which that appears to have crested quite a while ago and receded significantly to the chagrin of many of us. Because I don't mind telling you, part of my interest in this is simply my frustration with the Commonwealth that we are saddled with a structure that does not serve the public well. Now, the public doesn't seem particularly angry about that, other than they feel the legislature is too big and gets paid too much, all of which is true. But none of this seems to really address the few issues that they seem motivated by. Could you speculate on why it is that there's not more interest in a sort of good government push? Because all of the counties are saddled with this same anachronistic system by the Commonwealth, and our flexibility is really inhibited by it. It would just seem that more counties would be interested in this, or is it just too difficult to do?
Well, let me ask you, are you more interested in having more commissioners, or are you interested in having less other elected officials? That's basically the question in county government. The charge is usually, they usually say, well, 2 commissioners can decide for the whole county, so
Right.
we need more commissioners. Or we don't need elected sheriff, we don't need elected controller, we don't need and they start looking at the pathonetary, they start looking at the clerk of courts as so that's where I see the counties, people are happy in a sense with the commissions are either happy with the form of government they have because there's 3 of them. And they're not so crazy about the budget stresses and pressure they have from all the other elected officials. So that it sets up that dilemma.
I think it'd be very interesting to find out what the opinion of people in this county is. Now, where we are, in my opinion, because of our proximity to the state capital, I think that the public discourse and the media is centered on state government and very little on county government. I think county's role is very underappreciated in this general region of the state for that reason. So I think it would be difficult to focus people on and to understand. But I'll just outline for you from my own perspective on the things that I see as what I would be interested in if I could write the charter myself, which obviously I cannot. But the things that I wrote down here while we were speaking were modernized structure / cost efficiency. We're the fiscal agents of the county, so we're always looking for how to manage the resources better. Greater accountability for results, and I think some of that does go to this question of the fragmentation with several of our elected offices often pulling in other directions. The public doesn't understand that, and we've especially seen during the COVID situation, a lot of questions over why one office is doing one thing and another office is doing another thing, and that's created confusion. At a time it's enormously confusing to begin with. The other thing is broadening the geographic representation. Our county has an area that is very heavily populated, and it has another area that's modestly populated, and it has a large swath that is very, quote unquote, underpopulated relative to the others. And of course, the result of that is the elected officials on this board tend to always be from one segment of the county. And we've heard complaints over the years of that, and some at the lesser populated areas feel they're never going to get a seat on the county. So personally, I would be interested in seeing 4 elected districts and an at-large if I were king for a day. And I think that would generate some interest in those areas that feel underrepresented. And the last thing I wrote down was that we would probably be less susceptible to inappropriate partisan influence. That's a lesser concern, but it's there. So I don't know if that creates any impression on you, but these don't seem to be things that are gonna get people pounding the table. And obviously, if we were to make a decision to go this route, we don't want to engage in a protracted process that doesn't have a good prospect of success.
Agreed. What you described is very true. If there was a form of home rule that you could design with those parameters, yeah, you'd be looking at a council form of government, an optional plan. You could look at an optional plan form of government where you have accountability. You would then limit the questions in the optional plan. forms of government, because they would allow you to have a larger governing body, an executive, or elected or appointed, those sort of things.
Mhm.
You know, more along the line of a local government, a borough council, commissioner form, that kind of thing. And then you could have geographic representation, so you could have your model of 4 and 5, 4 and 1, that sort of thing, under the optional plans. But again, you're relying on the study commissioners to see it that way.
Right.
And I always advise people, and sometimes I get yelled at, quite frankly, because I say, look, if you're going to go down this path, you better know who's running.
Mhm.
Otherwise you are. And that leads to, you know, if you think there's 4 or 5 people you would vote for, you should make them one, and you should support them. Otherwise, if you have feelings about a particular form of government, it's still a political process. You still have the citizens to agree with your viewpoint.
Thank you, very helpful. I think that's all the questions.
Well, one thing, however, about the representation, I've done this with several counties, also in larger townships. The representation is still one person, one vote.
Mhm.
So to represent the rural or the more urban, suburban area, the more, I know what you mean, western part, southwestern part of the county, you're drawing very large districts to overcome the influence of the west shore of the 83 corridor.
Geographically, yes, it'd be very low.
Yeah, right. No, you'd have one person who's geographically located, you know, what's the county's population now? What are you, 220?
254, I think 256.
Okay, 250, so let's take 250, you have 4 at large,
Right.
okay? You got 60-some thousand voters, 62,000 voters per district,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Try to get 62,000 voters outside of your, you know, your urban area, that's gonna be a big district,
Oh, yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, they do have a council of governments out there, so I mean, they do act in unity on a number of things, so.
And that could be an effective selling point, to have single countywide representation there for an elected person, yeah, that would be effective. But optional plan could be set that way, you know, an optional plan form of government.
Hmm. Okay. I think the big question for us is how to sell it if we were to pursue this. I think there's some definite benefits. You know, when this first came up, when we first had you and I forget the gentleman who was with us at that time in to do this, we had a very good discussion, but we had essentially 1 commissioner in favor, 2 against. But that was also at a time when there was more financial distress and such with the county. And now at least for now, we're not there. Who knows what next year or the year after holds, especially in this environment. But, without those things, it seems this is a very, very heavy lift.
Yeah, and I would agree. As I said, the overriding lately, the biggest incentive for home rule for municipalities has been tax-based flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Some municipalities feel their county hasn't reassessed because the county commissioners, you know, they had an aversion more or less to reassessment because of the countywide nature of it, and some of the reactions, you know, the blowback that maybe you don't deserve, but your county responsibility. So they're looking to somehow restructure their tax base away from a property tax to rates that they can get outside of the municipal codes.
Yeah.
But you don't have that problem. You're sort of stuck with real estate. So if you weren't by your caps, a lot of times counties wouldn't have that argument about tax limitations.
Mhm.
Because your property cap, you know, you may not be near your property cap. You know, so that's a pressure that you don't have. But
Right.
municipalities are looking at home, you have as an option.
Are you aware of any other counties that are actively considering this type of undertaking now?
No, but I do get, yeah, Schuylkill's got a bunch of people that are agitating for it, but that seems to be more perennial than it is permanent, you know?
I see.
It's that every few years they come up. I don't have a good handle on other No, I don't, I'm not aware of that.
Okay,
But they do pop up, I mean,
yeah, okay.
Schuylkill right now, I know, I receive calls from Schuylkill County people. I'm trying to think who else.
Well, that's helpful. It gives me a general sense. There's not really a huge groundswell for this type of reform, which is.
Well, don't forget, you're asking the commissioners to pass a resolution saying, have someone look and change how we're doing our government. So an ordinary county without these pressures would probably not look at just initiating it.
Yeah.
And to have the petition requirements, you're at 200, I don't know how many people vote, I should have looked it up. I didn't have the handy for Cumberland, I did have the language. But think about if you had to have 5,000 people sign that petition to get on the ballot in 7 weeks, could they do it? There would have to be an overarching issue that would make them want to focus specifically on the structure of county government.
You know, not to mention quite an organization just to get the mechanics of it.
It's a political organization.
Yeah.
Just to get that many petitions across 7, 9, or 11 candidates. These are, it's a political process.
Yes.
That's why you see it more locally. It's much more effective locally than it is on the county level, because it's a heavy lift county.
Are you seeing continued interest at the municipal level?
Oh, absolutely, more so than ever.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In the last 10 years, I've probably worked with 4 municipalities. I mean, cities are switching. Altoona went home rule, Nanticoke went home rule. There's a bunch of them, but that's home rule for tax flexibility.
Tax flexibility is the driver.
Tax-based flexibility,
Tax-based flexibility, okay, so.
You understand what I mean? Municipalities have 3 or 4 pots of money.
Right.
Real estate is primary, earned income is the secondary, then business taxes, right? Employment-based and business taxes. For cities that are landlocked and they have no new development, their assessment's not going anywhere. And unless the county reassesses, they're pretty stagnant. So they have good paying jobs and good paying citizens, but they're limited by their codes of the rates of earned income tax. So they're forced to put property tax increases when they need any kind of tax increase. So they need that flexibility to switch back and forth between earned income and real estate transfer and property.
That raises one question for me. One of our frustrations in the past has been, in terms of assessment, that because of the uniformity, where we cannot do not the assessment, but we cannot have a different rate between commercial payers and residential payers. Does home rule provide any flexibility on that? It does
No,
not.
that's subject to taxation. That's in the Constitution. That's uniformity.
Okay.
That's required by the Constitution, that you have to have subjects of taxation. That was one of the I probably should have mentioned that. I was taxation subjects. They have to still be subject to
Uniformity clause. Okay.
Yeah. If you're a property owner, you pay the same tax rate as every other property owner, regardless of the use of your property.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
I just have one more. Jerry, as far as a home rule charter, could they be relatively simple?
Yes.
And when I mean simple, I get asked a lot. There seems to be redundancy and duplication with row offices, not all of them, some of them. Does the law state that certain row offices must remain under home rule? And if so, what would they be? We're a county of the 3rd class, if that matters.
Well, it does. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the only one that you may need to keep elected is district attorney. Okay, and I'm not certain of that, but I think the district attorney would want to have an elected position. The other offices are subject to the Government Study Commission's judgment of their operations. Is the clerk of courts and the proprietary 2 separate processes, or are they all judicial records? You know, are they left foot, right foot, but we need both to walk? So do we need to pick, you follow what I'm saying? Judicial record is key. Does it have to be split between civil and criminal? Is the recorder of deeds not a judicial record? Those kind of things. Is the controller function what a controller function could be? Is it an internal auditor? Is it a watchdog? You know, what is it? Is it a budget person? Or is it truly a controller that has power to investigate within the county's operations? And should that be an elected position? Does the sheriff have a duty, not an Andy Mayberry sheriff duty, but citizens don't understand the role of the sheriff. So is the sheriff necessary, or is an appointed security operation, you know, trying to think of the words for the general operations of the county. You get my point?
Yeah.
Does the coroner need to be elected? Okay, because election has qualification issues. So when you go down those role offices, then the question is, well, how many people need to be used in those offices? But those are all government study commission questions. Those are for the county role offices to justify to the government study commission. Is number one efficient and effective? Should it be an elected office? And can they be consolidated? And the charter is a simple document, can simply restructure that so that judicial record and then the administrative code can be used to determine how the work gets done. So your question was a simple charter. Charters can be, and they should be relatively simple, and then flesh out in the administrative code.
Thank you.
Because as I said, it's hard to change the charter.
It would seem, given what you described here, that there's not a catalyzing issue, as it were, here, other than our interest in efficiency, that what Vince is suggesting would probably have a greater prospect of success for us.
That's all I have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm really intrigued by the ability to do a special levy rate. And, which I think I'm also assuming that, you know, you could do a special levy for a period of time and then remove it when you had whatever money you needed to do a particular project. I think that's one of the things that I see happening in Cumberland County where, you know, just off the top of my head, I think about how Cumberland County, and I hear this over and over again, about how our fire companies are volunteer and they raise their own money. And, you know, if you could specially levy for fire companies and get a pot of money for them, we could pull that back. I think that's intriguing. I'm not convinced we're ever going to get a Commonwealth legislative fix on that. You know, that solves the problem. So I do think that is intriguing to me that you could do that and you know, pull it back then and say, we raised the money, we know we've got what we need, and you know, we don't have to pay for it anymore. And then the money would also stay here, right? It wouldn't be up to the legislative body or the governor to say, you get to have this much of the golden egg, right? We could raise our own money and keep it here. That is very intriguing to me.
I've always been intrigued by the area-wide ability of governments, local, home rule governments to do that. There is a law on the books that dates back to 1970, and I want to call it the Areawide Government Law. It had an environmental origin, but it's called Areawide Government, which does that sort of thing, but it requires the formation of a new government. So that's always been like, you know, not very politically acceptable. You know, it's almost like a school district. You form a fire protection district, elect people who then would levy taxes and then distribute money. You can see the problems politically with that.
Yes.
That law is on the books. I've always seen the area-wide powers as kind of a flexibility of the county to be the filter, you know, the elected official of the county to recognize subsets of problems within the larger area of the county, like fire protection. It's all about service provision as far as I can see. If you become a sponsor and a convener, that sort of thing.
One question on that. Go ahead. My question on that is, if the law does not allow the county to do that short of home rule, do the intergovernmental cooperation agreements allow locals to do something similar?
They do. You can share tax base under, intergovernmental agreements are very, very flexible. You can share tax base. The problem I have with intergovernmental agreements is they're not strict enough. They're not strong enough in terminating, in my experience. In other words, you get an election in one of the towns that they decide they don't want, they're not getting some kind of service,
Right.
they can blow the intergovernmental agreement up, okay?
Yeah,
I think it's,
we've actually had that with some of our regional police forces and such.
I don't want to say it, but that's exactly what I'm thinking. But if you look at the landfill, if you look at the solid waste ordinances that were passed when landfills were threatened by environmental regulations back in the 80s and the counties came to the rescue, you get into that compact willingly, but to get out is very hard. And I think that's where an intergovernmental agreement that's written, that's hard to get out of,
Yeah.
okay, it does the same thing as an area-wide cover. My concern about intergovernmental agreements is to get them accepted, you have to give people an exit path. And that, sometimes an exit path is too easy. You know, people get their nose out of joint or they don't think, or they, for their own political purposes, and they break it up. And they lose the idea of why they came together in the first place.
Yeah. I imagine it'd be hard to finance capital equipment without a long-term commitment to.
It is, it's hard to get a bank to say, yeah, I trust you all are gonna get along for 10 years.
Yeah. This is all very interesting, and I think counties and municipalities are going to need more solutions going forward instead of just kicking some of these cans down the road, such as the fire service. I hope more counties get interested, but this has been very helpful.
Well, the County Commission Association is very powerful. They have a lot of good ideas on menus, and you're active with the County Commission Association. I mean, these are the kind of things the legislature needs to understand, that you're not asking for a tax increase. You're not asking for new taxes. You're just asking for flexibility within the county so that people can pay their own way.
Right. Well, that's been one of our priority platforms for at least 20 years. I've been here 16, and it's been there long before I got here, so.
I know.
But it's going nowhere, as you know, it's going nowhere.
I know. It's, yeah,
We need new
I'm not
tools.
allowed to speak that way in public.
I do wonder if a home rule charter would take some of the partisanship out of what goes on, right? Because, I mean, the things that we do here at the county level, you know, funding for intellectual disabilities, there's nothing partisan about that. But the way that we seem to get the money, and even the way that the three of us get here, there is some partisanship to it, and I do wonder if it would take some of that away.
It could, because remember, the partisanship is rooted in the majority commissioner form.
Right.
You know, I'm looking at least two people with enough political experience that have been majority of Cumberland County voters. That carries weight, okay? You would have to to get rid of partisanship from that point of view, I think you'd have to have a larger council without a minority representation requirement, without a party requirement, you know? Where you could have 9 Republicans, 9 Democrats, 9 independents. You'd still have coalitions, you'd still have voting blocks, but you'd have to get rid of that minority representation. And I've seen that done in charters where there's no minority requirement, there's no representation by party requirement. But it is required that the person's seat is filled by someone of the same party if there's a resignation or whatever.
Okay. I think it would be, oh, go ahead. I think it would be very interesting to even have independence here. I think it would be a good idea to be able to have elected officials or appointed officials that were independent. I think it's important, you know, yeah.
There's nothing wrong with party representation, there's nothing wrong with But, you know, nonpartisan representation, it's all in how it's effectuated. You know, I'm watching Luzerne County, they have 11 council people. They went to 11 to disperse the political power that the county had acquired over the years and had abused so badly. And there's a voting block there. There's 4 and 5 that, you know, both Democrat and Republican, they have more of a philosophical bent than they have a political bent.
Wait, at what point does that just become unwieldy to have so many? What's the ideal number if there is one?
People in Luzerne will tell you that that's been met in Luzerne. That, you know, it's a little unwieldy, but you have to remember, Luzerne has a very powerful manager appointed by the council. So when you're talking independence and you're talking administrative efficiency, you're often talking about an independent executive, not necessarily an elected executive, but an independent executive appointed by a governing body with, you know, with some longevity, you know, so that person has to, their job requires them to be less partisan and more fairly balanced. You know, you're talking maybe an executive legislative form of government there. Because right now, you're the executive and you're the legislature all along.
Yeah. Okay. How many counties in Pennsylvania have an elected county executive?
Ooh, well, Delaware, Lehigh, Northampton, Erie.
Really?
Yeah, Erie has a very powerful, Lehigh and Northampton are very powerful. Delaware has, they have I apologize, Delaware has 5 full-time commissioners, and I think they appoint the manager. So they have 5 full-time commissioners, very powerful board.
But they appoint the manager, not elect, is not elected.
Right, they appoint the manager, yeah, the elected executives are Lehigh, Northampton, Erie,
Okay.
and have to do some more.
That-
I want to have to do some more.
That's fine, it gives me a good idea, so. Okay, all very interesting. A lot to chew on here, a lot to think about for the future too, so. Anyone else have additional questions? Did you folks have anything additional for us? This has been great.
Yeah, thank you for letting me show up.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here today, and,
I think, there was a chat number, there was 100, I think as Mark said, 100,000 people voted for governor. So, you know, you're looking at 5,000 people for the, you know, I wasn't far off, 5,000 people would need to sign up for this.
okay.
And you would need 2,000 signatures to get on the commission to be able to run, within the ballot, so those are pretty high hurdles.
You know, we're about half the size, we're a little less than half the size of Lancaster, so that, you know, that makes perfect sense, so.
I had Lancaster number right in front of me, and I thought, well, yeah, I always thought you about a little less than half of that.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else have anything additional? I think that wraps it up for us. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us. I think it's possible we have some follow-up questions. We have your contact information. And if you think of anything additional for us, please feel free to send it along. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Okay. Good discussion. Great presentation. Okay, we'll move on to item 4, any additional business to come before the group. Anyone, staff, nothing we need to cover? Okay, we do open the floor for public comment. Do we have anyone online waiting? There's nothing, so I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Your turn.